A little south of Dover, Delaware, Highway Route 1 crosses over a wetland expanse and the St. Jones River. Few in the speeding cars give either more than a brief glance, instead focused on getting to their various destinations. Yet the St. Jones was once as important to Delaware as the roadway that now spans it. It has flowed through the state's history for more than 3 centuries, all the while making its slow journey eastward from Dover to the Delaware Bay. Generations of Delawareans have used and shaped the river for their evolving needs, often leaving traces of their efforts behind, which tell the story of their lives and communities, as well as the story of the St. Jones.
Central Delaware was one of the last areas that Europeans began to actively settle during the 17th century. Sussex County had been settled fairly early, and then Newcastle as well.
Only in the late 1600s did people start coming into Kent County from Maryland and Virginia. And certainly one of the more popular areas to settle were along the St. Jones.
If you think about what the New World was like, the descriptions that we read from some of the early colonists make it sound wild. I mean, huge forests that were incredibly dense with very few roads, and the ones that were trails. They were Indian trails, going off into the wilderness, which was populated with all sorts of predators. It was much safer to stick to the water and much easier too.
Like other Delmarva tributaries, the St. Jones soon became a water highway, providing colonists with easy access from Delaware Bay to the abundant game and timber available inland. Amidst the marshes, there were points of higher ground, which soon developed into permanent landings that served early settlement sites.
Part of a pipe bowl.
This is the area we call Forest Landing, and we know from historical records that was an active landing area for the Dover area, this part of Kent County, and later Camden, from probably 1690 on.
The marsh systems by the 17th century were fairly well established and were big. And the landing itself provided a source of fast land that enabled Europeans to access the river and get ashore when needed.
You got the line. Every farmer had to find a way to get his produce, be it hogsheads of tobacco or whatnot, onto boats and ships to ship it off to a market. And so landings were very economically important.
They would acquire the names of their owners. They would become focal points for people who are shipping material out of the Delaware.
However, larger ships could not navigate a meandering river like the St. Jones, so early settlers relied on a smaller vessel called a shallop.
Shallops were developed in Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries as sort of an open, rowboat, a dory. They were developed for shallow draft areas where, you'd be going up into tributaries inshore on rivers and creeks.
They could come to these river landings, pick up whatever produce, pick up people, whatever that was being moved about, and then take them upriver to Philadelphia or elsewhere. It became ideally suited for the way that the natural environment of the Delaware at the time was.
With abundant natural resources, easy access to Delaware Bay and beyond, settlers along the St. Jones prospered during the 18th century, establishing towns such as Dover, which soon attained regional significance.
With the relocation of the capital from Newcastle to Dover in 1777 during the American Revolution, an increased focus was brought upon the St. Jones River, both as a transportation corridor and also as an avenue for commerce.
Many of the landowners along the river now became Delaware's most active patriots, including John Dickinson.
John was one of our founding fathers. John was involved in almost every major political activity going on at the time of the Revolutionary War. He was the signer of the U.S. Constitution.
Dickinson was also one of Delaware's wealthiest landowners with a large plantation house that today is an important historical site.
The house represents 1785 time period of when John Dickinson was living here. John often talked about the river being about a mile from the front of the house.
Eventually owning about 5,000 acres, Dickinson called his river properties a prospect of plenty and protected his holdings through strict leases with his tenants.
He is an early protector of the resources. He is aware that there's a finite matter of resources, especially with the wooded areas. And again, that is put in the lease agreements.
The river supported 5 other large plantations as well, including Kingston upon Hull, and all depended on the waterway for transportation and trade.
People went to and from Dover. Crops went right on out to the bay and right on up to Philadelphia. It was their major transportation source.
Further upriver, formal and informal communities blossomed as well, often near landings that could provide them with the same easy access afforded the plantation owners. One of these has been discovered near Lebanon Landing on a large property known as Wildcat Manor, owned by the Hun family, wealthy Quakers opposed to slavery.
Well, this particular site does have a connection to the Underground Railroad. Huntown was a free slave development right at the entrance of this, and there are the remains of approximately 6 foundations at the entrance. So it's a significant archaeology site in a lot of respects.
What we have is we believe to be a pier foundation of a dwelling that was located in this part of Wildcat. This was probably part of the Huntown, which was a free black settlement mid-19th century and later. It may be a bit earlier too.
But the St. Jones offered fledgling communities more than just a route to the outside world. The river and marshes provided fish and waterfowl, along with access to the abundant fish and shellfish resources of Delaware Bay. As the region's population grew, Bowers Beach, at the mouth of the St. Jones, became one hub of Delaware's oystering fleet, a fact that is celebrated annually at an event called Big Thursday.
Oystering has been a big thing in Delaware for years, and everybody ate oysters. They ate them stewed, steamed, smoked, you name it, fried. It was a big thing, and then they put this ban on for quite a few years on when you could oyster. And so it lifted on Thursday, I think in August, and so they started having a big Thursday celebrating it.
Sometimes the best intentions of man result in negative consequences.
Delaware was growing, and with it, the state capital. Dover was no longer a small hamlet, but a growing town that demanded more goods and services. The growing river traffic, which now included larger motorized vessels, was challenged by the river's unique natural course. So the Army Corps of Engineers was asked to solve the emerging navigation problem.
My understanding of it was to make the river a little more navigable, because it had some very sharp turns and oxbows in it. And they were hard for vessels going up and down, mainly the steamboats, to kind of navigate. And so if you create a new channel by sort of cutting those off, you create a more or less a straight watercourse.
From the air, the land is literally carved with these straight and narrow streams or ditches, if you will, that have changed the way that the systems themselves function.
It appears that the area of the river that came here is now an elbow, a dried up elbow, and it appears that the siltation probably shut down the landing activity here.
That has also altered the ecosystem and the natural flow of water in the estuary, and the byproduct isn't necessarily positive.
You know, 30 years ago, it was pretty well known to be unclean river, I would say.
With its channel straightened and ecosystem changing, the St. Jones and its watershed were experiencing the price of progress. World War II prompted the establishment of the Dover Airdrome, which eventually became Dover Air Force Base. 1,200 housing units were built near the river in the late 50s, while Dover and the surrounding suburbs grew 75% during the same decade. All this growth produced solid waste that was dumped in unregulated county and private landfills, usually located in nearby undeveloped natural areas. The Hun family, with its large property along the river, ran one such operation.
They accepted waste from the city of Dover and from, other industries and private people throughout the Kent County and in the local area.
By the early 70s, the Wildcat Landfill had grown to about 45 acres, when state and federal environmental laws prompted the cleanup of hazardous sites that threatened public health. The Wildcat was one of the first in Delaware to be chosen.
When I first walked out on the site, there were barrels exposed all over the place. The landfill cover had been very thin, so anything that had any buoyancy to it just sort of slowly worked its way up through the soils.
During the next 10 years, the state gradually cleaned up the Wildcat Landfill, removing some material, covering the rest, and building a barrier to prohibit runoff from polluting the St. Jones. By the mid-90s, the site showed little signs of what it once was. Remarkably, the property is now being considered for a very different use.
Kent County purchased the property in 2004 from the Hunt family. When they were ready to be done with it, they decided that it would be a good idea to keep it as preserved as possible.
And I said, well, one thing I do not want is houses or businesses or anything like that. I wanted to keep the nature and the quietness and things like that.
Fortunately, Shirley Hunt is not the only Delawarean interested in preserving the natural qualities of the St. Jones watershed. There is now a growing awareness of the need to restore and respect the river, and quite a few volunteers lending a hand.
The state of Delaware and Kent County have worked together to come up with many Earth Day activities, Make a Difference Day activities, which promotes volunteerism, also in order to create a better shoreline restoration, especially on the northerly parts of the St. Jones River where it starts at Silver Lake.
When I found out they were going to do some tree planting, I said, okay, let me come over here and beautify the place where I frequent often with my dog.
We've been a 5-year project putting buffers along the St. Jones, trying to improve water quality. We've had volunteer projects twice a year. We've got over 700 shrubs on the other end. We'll have over 250 in this section of the stream, trying to replace natural vegetation that was been removed over time.
We have a lot of people that use this in various different ways, and just some would just like to enjoy it, looking at it. Others fishing in the lake area above here, and it is a major recreational area for the people of this area.
But caring for the St. Jones also means monitoring it, making sure the restoration efforts of committed volunteers, organizations, and agencies are not offset by new threats to the ecosystem. This is one of the responsibilities of the St. Jones Reserve, one component of the Delaware National Estuarine Research Reserve.
We are conducting research, especially water quality and weather monitoring data we collect on a continual basis, because the weather has a huge impact on the estuary and on the water quality.
This work is part of a long-term monitoring program conducted by the 28 research reserves throughout the country. But the St. Jones Reserve also serves as a living laboratory, supporting coastal research specific to the river and the entire Delaware estuary.
One of the larger projects that we've been working on recently is on sea level rise, looking about the vulnerability of not only our natural resources, but also our infrastructure, and seeing how Delaware is going to be impacted by the different scenarios of sea level rise.
But if the river is to be valued, it also needs to be understood, which is the other part of the reserve's mission.
Basically what we're doing is translating the science into a language that the everyday person can understand. And so we do that in our public programming and outreach.
This includes a wide range of educational offerings, including training workshops, field trips, and public events, all designed to use the reserve as a living classroom to provide a better understanding of the value of the watershed.
We even work with our coastal decision makers and bring that information to them in a workshop or training setting so that they have the science that they need to make those critical key policy-making decisions for our state.
Finally, the Reserve works with formal educators with programs such as Make a Splash, offered annually to hundreds of school students in partnership with the Reserve's neighbor, the John Dickinson Plantation.
Make a Splash is a water festival where we're focusing on our estuary and specifically using the St. Jones River as a case study.
What would they have gotten out of this river to smoke in here?
Ducks.
Okay, might have had some ducks. What else? Fish.
The students participate in different activities on the John Dickinson Plantation to understand the history and how the waterway was used back in the 1700s. And then they come over here to the St. Jones side and we talk about the science and trying to close that loop of what we used to know back then and what we know today.
Okay, well, a watershed is basically a section of land where all of the water goes into one big area.
Building public awareness through education and volunteerism is important, but it is also critical to protect the river through land preservation. Years ago, Delaware Wildlands established the Ted Harvey Wildlife Area, which is now held and managed by the Delaware Division of Fish and Wildlife.
The Ted Harvey Wildlife Area was one of our first acquisitions. It was one of the places that our founder, Ted Harvey, loved the most. It is really almost the kidneys or the filtering system for the watershed. It helps take everything that's upstream of that area and filter out the pollutants and bring out vitality and life to the water resources. It's a very productive landscape.
This rich landscape also attracts waterfowl, allowing hunters to continue another tradition deeply rooted in the river's history.
The hunting promotes conservation among another stakeholder group, which is sportsmen and women. And they provide an opportunity for us to connect with a different stakeholder group and a different group of people who are interested in conservation.
Nonprofits and government agencies are now engaged in helping the public value, restore, and protect the St. Jones. But as the river's watershed is only a part of the larger Delaware estuary, these actions are but parts of a much broader environmental effort, the Delaware Bayshore Initiative.
The Delaware Bayshore Initiative is focusing on the restoration and protection of habitats across the landscape from Delaware City to Lewis.
Collectively, these protected natural areas are now recognized worldwide as critical in supporting many species, including migratory shorebirds and horseshoe crabs. Each year, these habitats attract more visitors seeking ecotourism and recreational activities, which promotes greater public environmental stewardship. This increased tourism also helps improve local town economies, which is another goal of the initiative. And critical to this effort's success is the St. Jones Watershed.
The St. Jones Watershed is vitally important. It sits really in the middle of the Bayshore Initiative area and has a beautiful expanse of tidal marsh, beaches, and the St. Jones River itself. The St. Jones Reserve serves as a hub for research and education to promote what we're trying to do with the Bayshore Initiative.
We need to do a better job of promoting the relationship between humans and the environment and recognize that not only do we have a responsibility in causing some damages to the environment and pollution that is emitted, but also in enhancing and restoring that resource.
Like the bay it flows into, the St. Jones has shaped the lives of Delawareans for more than 300 years and will continue to do so.
The St. Jones has been here. It was here before people used the river. The river helps provide us with a variety of things, from food to transportation to recreation today.
This is a very important piece of Kent County that, you know, it's where it is now, but we need to imagine and work towards getting to it where it needs to be.
My hope is that they understand the heritage here, that our coastal heritage was really grounded in this river, and to understand that truly what happened in the past is having great impact on us today, and what has happened today will have impact on our children and our children's children.